Welcome to today's episode of Queerly Natural, where we talk about queerness in the natural world. We discuss different traits and qualities of animals, plants, fungi, and more, and how they relate to queer identities in humans. Some may argue our identities are not natural, and we are here to say they queerly are. We're your hosts. I'm Ilana.
And I'm Sage. I want to start by thanking our Legacy Tree patron, Nate, for his support. Thanks, Nate. If you'd like to join Nate in supporting the show, you can contribute to our Patreon or Ko-fi, or you can give us a shout out on social media. I'd also like to apologize in advance for Ilana's audio quality this episode. It will be a one-time thing. She is currently doing very cool research in Alaska, and I am so proud of her. And now, today's species, the common cockchafer, or Melolontha melolontha. Even though they are widely considered a pest, Ilana and I couldn't help but fall in love with this adorable insect's fascinating way of life.
Hey Sage, guess what?
What?
It's our 10th episode.
Double digits. Did you think we would make it this far?
I didn't even know we were going to make it to episode 1, to be honest. I had this idea for like a year or two before we went about it, so I'm pretty happy.
Right? Didn't we make the Facebook account a year before our first episode or something? I remember talking to you about it a year and change before we actually did it.
So I had the idea sometime in undergrad, and then I was talking about it for a while. We made all of the name and stuff decisions the spring semester, recorded all of the summer, and then released in the fall, I believe. So that was some time to build up to it, but here we are, trying our best to keep up with however many episodes, however frequently.
Yeah. We all have busy lives.
Life is crazy.
You're doing a PhD.
You're working.
So, yeah, we're living our lives. But we have this great podcast that's made it to 10 episodes. Cheers. Cheers to us and our friendship.
Yay!
And our entrepreneurship, even though we've not made any profit off of this. It's a good time. Anyway, yeah, episode 10. What is episode 10 about, you might ask?
What is it about?
Well, I'm here to tell you that this episode is going to be about one species, kind of two species, 1.5 species, but it'll primarily be about the common cockchafer, or Melolontha melolontha.
That's a mouthful. It's less of a mouthful just because it repeats itself.
Right. It's a weird one, though. Melolontha. It's hard for me to say. Anyway, I'll mostly call them cockchafers. It'll be mostly about the common cockchafer. However, the forest cockchafer is going to feature heavily in this episode as well. Let's get started. The common cockchafer, otherwise known as the maybug, the may beetle, or the doodlebug.
Doodlebug. I love it.
Right, doodlebug. It's really cute. The doodlebug can be found throughout many places in Europe, from Russia westward to Britain and Northern Europe. So it's very widespread, as the name common cockchafer suggests. But some closely related species that occur in the US that you may have heard of are June bugs or June beetles.
Okay, I was thinking about that when you said May bug. I was like, wait, we have June bugs.
Yeah, the cockchafers are in Coleoptera, which is the name of the group beetles belong to. And then within Coleoptera, they belong to Scarabidae, which is the group that contains scarab beetles specifically. And our June bugs in the US are not the same genus. They're not Melolontha, but they are very closely related to Melolontha beetles. And they're also in Scarabidae.
So are these pretty big beetles then? Because I've only seen June bugs once in my life when I was working at a farm in June. They're huge.
Yeah.
And very dumb looking when they fly. They just fly into things.
They're a little bit bigger than a Japanese beetle, I think. But I have actually a core memory about June bugs. My parents, when they bought their house, their lawn was a fallow field. And June bugs, they lay their larvae in the soil of fields. So for the first 10 years we lived in the house I grew up in, there would be huge swarms of June bugs every June. And they would fly at our house and they would swarm in the evening around this tree in our front yard, and I would go out and I would catch as many of them as I could in a jar. Like, I liked playing with them, but like they kind of freaked me out. And a lot of the time I would go back to like go to bed, and I would lay down at night in my bed, and then I would hear the like wings of the June bug in my hair, and I would freak out. I would freak out every time, but they were everywhere for like 6 weeks. Anyway, so it was interesting to me to have this like core memory in my head of June bugs, and then read about the lifestyle of their cousin, the cockchafer. So we are talking about two very widespread species, the common cockchafer and the forest cockchafer. The forest cockchafer is Melolontha hippocastani, so they're both Melolontha. The two are differentiated by slight differences in adult behavior and morphology, as well as larval habitat. Females of the common cockchafer lay eggs in open landscapes like fields and orchards, and females of the forest cockchafer lay eggs in forest soil. So while both are widespread throughout Europe and they co-occur in a lot of places, like there might be a forest right next to a field, and so like within the larger context of the landscape, they are co-occurring there, you know? So even though they co-occur in a lot of places, the common cockchafer is more abundant, whereas the forest cockchafer is less abundant because it's restricted to forested areas, and those are less common than fields and orchards. So why don't we look at some pictures?
Oh no, I have to describe this thing. Or, well, these wonderful crawlies.
I'm excited for you to see it. They have features.
Ooh, fun antennae.
Right?
So overall, they're very much like oval with just like a little bit of an extra bump by their head. They've got like their wings and I guess, is that abdomen area? I forget. You know, their back area is about twice as long as like the head and stuff. Thorax, I think that's the correct word. I remember my entomology that I never actually took a class in. It's fine. So they've got that. It's kind of like this like shiny like orange mahogany kind of color for their like wing pads or covers. I forget. There's like a name for that too. With like black heads.
Wait, I'm looking up a diagram. So there's the head, the thorax is under the head, and then the end part is the abdomen.
Okay. So it is their abdomen, I think, that has the wings and stuff, and the wing covers, which are that like brownish mahogany color. The head and thorax are like black, and then underneath the wings, they've got like ribbing, right? That's like a black with looks like a white stripe or triangles down the side. Their legs are the same color as the wing covers, and they've got 6 of them, which they should because, you know, they're an insect. That's one of the requirements. And then they have 2 antennae that look like they vary in how bushy they are. But like a lot of different insects have antennae that are not like just straight lines, but are actually covered in like hairs. And actually that's like a key feature I know in identifying some. I used to identify dung flies, and one of the features you could look for was how hairy their antennae were. So I'm seeing like 2 different versions, I think, here. One that's like entirely hairy, and one that's just like pom-pom tips.
Hell yeah. By the pom-pom tips, do you mean the like feathery ones?
Yeah, kind of like a fan almost. Yeah, feathery fan, like not like a full pom-pom, but
that was my favorite part about them, honestly.
Yeah, it's very cute antennae.
Their color is very warm and inviting. That brown, like you said, it's like mahogany. But those antennae, they have character.
I can picture like furniture with that color.
Yeah. Ooh, furniture made out of cockchafers.
Now we're getting into like D&D fantasy territory. Yeah, so and just so people know, this is the adult form that we're talking about.
Right.
Their larval form is just like a weird semi-translucent white wormy thing.
Grub, yeah.
Yeah, grub. Well, that's the term, but they kind of look like fat worms with like little legs at the front. But yeah, I think I covered a good amount of it. They look like they're like the size of one section of your finger lengthwise. So not terribly huge.
Bigger than some, though. Bigger than, like, ladybugs or something.
Definitely bigger than some. I'm trying to think of how big they would be compared to a Japanese beetle. a little larger.
I think they're slightly larger.
They're just on my brain because they're invasive in this area, eating my cauliflower.
Oh no. So that's a great description. How cute do you think it is?
With those antennae, I'd say pretty adorable.
Yeah.
And like nice coloring. It's got it going for itself.
I agree. Do you want to hear my official description?
Yes, please.
This is the best description I could find. And I was just telling Ilana before, it was surprisingly difficult to find information about this very common, widespread species in Europe. So I think it's missing some things, but we'll go ahead and read it anyway. So it says, adult cockchafers typically range from 25 to 30 millimeters, which is like 2.5 to 3 centimeters. Adult common cockchafers have a dark head with a shiny black pronotum covered by short, closely set hairs. And let me just quick Google what a pronotum is, because that is not a word I know.
I've got no idea.
Pronotum, the dorsal sclerite of the prothorax of an insect. I hate that looking up the definition just gave us more words we would have to look up the definition to.
Don't you love science? Okay, about where on the insect is it? Like on a diagram.
Okay, so the pronotum is like the part right under their head.
Gotcha. So like the chin area?
Oh, no. So like, okay, you're looking down at the insect, right? From the top, like God?
Yeah, okay. Or like me standing up.
Yeah, or like a person standing up. And so that you have the head, and then like there's like usually part like right under the head, like above the wings.
Black area.
Yeah, and that's called the pronotum.
Okay. I was calling it the abdomen, and I thought that was weird, but I went with it.
Yeah, okay. So it's supposed to go head, thorax, abdomen. They said the pronotum is part of the prothorax. So like this thing right under the head is usually like a portion of the thorax. I could be wrong. I'm very sorry if you're an entomologist listening to this and you're like, wow.
Hey, if you're an entomologist listening to this, please message us and let us know.
Yeah. If there's something offensively wrong about what we're saying, please correct us because we are always willing to learn.
We're trying our best.
Yeah.
Okay. It goes head. That black area behind the head is the thorax. And then the long, like, back area, which the wings are over, is the abdomen.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, the wing area is called the elytra. Minecraft.
Is the elytra the casing over the wings?
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we've nailed down some key insect words here.
Okay, so it goes head, thorax, abdomen. That makes more sense to me now.
Yeah. Head, thorax, abdomen. And then the part right under the head is like part of the thorax and it's called the pronotum.
Maybe it's the part that like connects the head to the thorax. Is that it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's like what it's supposed to be. So, okay, back to our description. Adult cockchafers range from 2.5 to 3 centimeters. Adults have a dark head with a shiny black pronotum, right? Remember, that's right under on the thorax. And that pronotum is covered by short, closely set hairs. They also have a dull black abdomen and a long, flat pygidium. I looked this up earlier, but I think I'm going to Google this one too. Pygidium. What is with entomologists just making up these words?
We're mycologists. We're not better than that.
Yeah, that's true.
We can't complain.
If you listen to our mushroom episode, there are lots of words in it. You're right. Okay, so the pygidium is the part at the other end of the insect near the butt. So right at the end of the abdomen, opposite the head. Back to our description. They have a dull black abdomen and a long, flat pygidium. And so if you look at a picture of the insect, the pygidium, the part at the butt, is kind of like long and pointed. So that's like the notable characteristic here. The eyes are multifaceted with 5,475 facets per eye, providing very acute vision. Don't ask me how they know the number of facets.
You know someone counted them. And it was probably a rough day for whoever it was.
Right. Well, I wonder if they counted them, or I wonder if they were like, okay, so this is the area of the eye. Here's like 10 facets in an area or something.
It could have been that. I also could see like some pretty precise photography and then counting from a picture, or someone really just had to sit there and count. Depending on the date when this was done, I think those are our three choices.
Right, yeah. So they have very acute vision with these almost 5,500 facets. Males have longer antennae than females, with a large fan-like club protruding from each terminus. So their antennae are segmented, and the terminus is like where two segments connect. And at each connection, there's a long club that is kind of like fanned and like feathery. And that's what Ilana was talking about with these antennae that look, like I said, they have character. They're beautiful. New wing cases are typically modeled with a white powder, so they can look kind of dusty sometimes. Immature larval cockchafers reach lengths of 40 to 46 millimeters, so almost 5 centimeters. They can get pretty big. And they have a dull white body covered with black at the abdominal extremity, so the end opposite the head. Cockchafer grubs curve into an arc and have a large head with strong grabbing mandibles. In overall appearance, grubs are fleshy, elongated, and slightly hairy. So that's what they look like. I think this description could be more detailed because, like Ilana said, there's like those white triangles along the side of the insect. And just some other things, like they mentioned the color of the abdomen was black, but they didn't mention the elytra are like this mahogany brown. But it was the best I could find, and I just added what I thought needed to be added. So there you go. On to their habitat and life cycle. After mating, the females of the common cockchafer dig into the soil about 20 centimeters and they lay 10 to 20 eggs. And they do this in open landscapes like fields or orchards, like I said. The female may do this several times throughout the 6 weeks that they are flying around between April and May. So in total, one female in her lifetime will lay about 60 to 80 eggs. So the eggs are in the soil. After 4 to 6 weeks, they hatch and the creamy white grubs emerge. These larvae feed on plant and tree roots, tubers like potatoes. They'll devastate orchards and forestry operations, especially the forest cockchafer, eating tree roots in their larval stages. And they eat voraciously April to October. And then they slow down their development and their consumption of food throughout the winter. They're less active. They will remain in the soil for a total of 2 to 4 years, depending on the climate. And then the autumn of that final year that they're in the soil, when they've reached 4 to 5 centimeters in size, they pupate for 6 weeks, and during that time they develop into the adult cockchafer. After 6 weeks, the adult emerges from the pupa and it'll overwinter in the soil because, like I said, they will pupate in the fall and they're not active until May because they're May bugs. So the adults will overwinter in the soil during that time between 20 to 100 centimeters deep. And then the following spring, and this will be when they are 3 to 5 years old from when the egg was laid, they work their way to the surface and then they survive up above land for 6 weeks from the middle of April through the end of May.
Do they eat anything when they're adults?
When they're adults, they eat foliage and they prefer European beech, which is Fagus sylvatica. That's the scientific name. And they also prefer oaks or quercus species. So yeah, that's what they eat during their adult life. And then when they're adults and they're flying around during mating season, both common and forest cockchafers, this is where we're going to be talking about both of them from now on because they have a lot of things in common and they co-occur in a lot of places in Europe, like I said. So a lot of places you'll find both of these insects in the same place. So during the mating season, both common and forest cockchafers form calamitous mass breedings throughout Central Europe.
Oh, the calamity.
Yeah, that was the word I saw, calamitous. And like I said, if it's anything like the June bugs at my house, it's truly just a ton of insects just flying around like in a very concentrated mass around the top of a tree. So I could believe calamitous. So individuals perform a daily spectacular swarming flight around the treetops of host trees, which, like I said, are preferably European beech or oak. And peak flight activity will happen around sunset each day from mid-April till the end of May. And to be more specific about it, the beetles flying around these trees all tend to be male, and the females will remain on the leaves of the trees where they were feeding throughout the day. So the females just stay where they are, and the males fly to them and swarm around the tree where they're feeding.
Make them do the effort.
Right. And to find a mate, Melolontha species, so both of these, the common and the forest cockchafer, they use something called semiochemicals. Don't ask me how those are different from normal chemicals.
They're special.
They're special. So they use semiochemicals. Swarming males primarily use leaf alcohols emitted by host plants when they are eaten by females. This is a type of semiochemical, and they use this chemical as attractants for mating. So the females are eating the leaves on the tree. In response to being eaten, the tree emits these leaf alcohols. Plants are not the sedentary, inactive objects that popular culture makes them out to be. When something happens to them, they respond very quickly, usually with chemicals.
Plant world is brutal.
Right? The plant can't move, obviously, to physically defend itself. Usually, there are some plants that can move quickly enough to deter herbivory and things like that. But most plants can't move. So instead of using movement, they use chemicals. So the plant's being eaten, it emits these leaf alcohols, and then the males smell the leaf alcohols that the eaten plant is giving off, and they use that to be like, oh, there's probably females there, there's probably something eating this plant, and hopefully it's female cockchafers. So that's the first thing that attracts them. And these leaf alcohols are something called pheromones, and this is a word used to describe chemicals that are emitted that only benefit the receiver, not the sender. So in this case, the plant doesn't receive a benefit from this interaction with the male cockchafer. It just releases this chemical. It doesn't get a benefit from this, but the male gets the benefit of being like, oh, there's probably a female there. Leaf alcohols from various host trees attracted male common cockchafers, but they were most strongly attracted to alcohols released from European beech. And they tested what types of damage to these leaves would attract the cockchafers, and they found that leaves that were mechanically damaged, as if they were chewed, attracted male cockchafers the most often. So that kind of supports the idea that the action that is causing the attraction of the males is the females eating the host tree.
Can you explain what another type of damage could be?
Another type of damage could maybe be like cutting or burning or dehydration or something like that.
There's also sucking insects too.
Sucking insects that would just suck the sap out. Yeah. So the type of damage that they respond to was the chewing that the females would be doing. And interestingly, females do not respond to these leaf alcohols. Females have an entirely different set of behavioral responses to certain chemicals, and they just don't respond to this at all. So that's the initial thing that attracts them. But there has to be something else, so that they can differentiate between trees that are being chewed up by other insects, other insects that aren't cockchafers, or maybe the other species of cockchafer. So in order to make sure that it's the type of damage that they want, the specific damage of females eating host trees, they also use other chemicals to hone in on, what they want. Females of both species, the forest and the common cockchafer, emit sex pheromones as well, called tuloquinone and 1,4-benzoquinone, in addition to phenol. Those are very long words, very complicated words. Just understand that they're chemicals, they're pheromones that the females emit. So the phenol is attractive to males of both the common and the forest cockchafer. Male common cockchafers only respond to tuloquinone, not benzoquinone. And males of the forest cockchafer only respond to benzoquinone, but not tuloquinone. So there's a little bit of specificity in there, but keep in mind, the females emit all three of them. So even though the male of one is attracted to one of them and the male of the other is attracted to the other, there's a lot of overlap because the females of both species produce all three of those chemicals. So that's how the cockchafers kind of know where to find each other during mating season. All right, and then next, I just want to say something about the role that these insects have had on human society, because they interact with humans in a very critical way by consuming our agricultural species. They eat the roots of crops and trees that we plant to harvest for an economic benefit, which makes them of interest to us. They were once very abundant throughout Europe and were a major crop pest. So like I said, the lifespan of a cockchafer is 3 to 5 years. So every 3 to 5 years, the literature calls them tribes of cockchafers, but they're really just populations of cockchafers. And so in a certain place in Europe, there will be cockchafers all of one tribe. And that tribe will all be on the same developmental schedule. So every 3 to 5 years in one locality, there will be a huge emergence of cockchafers. But in addition to the emergence once every 3 to 5 years, there used to be a huge mass outbreak every 30 to 40 years. So that used to happen. And back in 1320, there was actually a court trial against cockchafers in a place called Avignon, France. Avignon, France. I don't know how to speak French. I don't know how that's said. So the cockchafers were brought to trial in a court by the people angry that they were eating their crops and stuff.
Did they have to wear suits?
I don't know. I don't know who represented them, but ultimately they lost the case.
I am the lawyer and I speak for the cockchafers.
Right? It gives me very B-movie vibes. But this shit actually happened in 1320. So ultimately the cockchafers lost the trial and they were sentenced to withdraw to a designated area in France within 3 days. And obviously they're insects, so they didn't do that.
Are they in contempt of court?
Yeah, at the end of the 3 days, all the people rounded up as many cockchafers as they could and killed them. And that was their punishment. And for anyone interested in similar situations like that, there are apparently other instances of trials against animals in Europe in the Middle Ages. So you can go down the rabbit hole if you want.
Did any of them actually follow the rules?
I don't know. I'm sure there happened to be some cockchafers in that one area, so I hope they let those ones live at least.
I mean, if not, they're against the court ruling.
Right. People really cared about these insects, and they were mad about it. Then, in another instance, in 1574, it was like a mass occurrence of cockchafers, and there were so many of them that they clogged and stopped water mills in Severn Valley. There's millions and millions of insects, and they all dropped dead around the same time. And they literally clogged like rivers and water mills. These insects were like a big problem in the lives of everyday people in Europe for quite a while. In the 1800s, the primary mechanism for controlling cockchafer populations was to round up and kill the adult beetles, which were numerous. One account says that more than 20 million cockchafers could be collected in an 18-kilometer square forest. So that's a lot of cockchafers. And people would eat them. There is a French recipe for cockchafer soup that calls for a pound of cockchafers stripped of their wings and legs, sizzled in butter, and cooked in chicken broth with either chicken or veal.
All right. Sounds good.
And one serving contained about 30 insects.
Lots of protein.
Yeah, a lot of protein in that.
I mean, these guys are like mass producing every few years. I figured there'd be a good source of food. I personally don't eat bugs, but that's actually for religious reasons. Otherwise, I would.
Right? And it's just curious that a lot of Western culture is like anti-eating bugs. But like Western culture is based in European culture, and they were doing that stuff.
Sometimes people like to forget about things if they don't like it. But, every once in a while, maybe you need to try some bugs.
Yeah, especially if they're clogging up your waterways. There's so many of them. Like, why not just like have a little taste?
They're an agricultural pest, so instead just eat them. There you go.
There's another account in a German newspaper in the 1920s of students eating candied cockchafers coated in sugar. I really like the range of, you have the sweet and the savory. But yeah, no, the German and the French, they were eating them like candy. Literally. And apparently the larvae are also edible, the grubs of the cockchafer, but they require a little bit more work to make them edible because you have to soak them in vinegar for a long time so that you can get all the soil out of their digestive tract. But they would also eat them as well. But that's all changed because today cockchafers, while they're still a pest and they still affect agriculture and natural landscapes, their numbers have greatly dwindled since the start of industrialized agriculture and the widespread use of insecticides. Like I said, they can still affect the landscape. There are modern accounts of outbreaks of adult cockchafers that defoliate tree stands and young grubs that feed on roots in the soil that can cause heavy losses of young trees to the point where the combination of the two, the adults eating the foliage and then the young grubs killing the young trees, they can prevent the regeneration of forest stands still to this day.
Oh, wow.
But like I said, the impact is greatly reduced because their numbers are so much lower. Like the 30 to 40 year mass outbreak of them is not quite as pronounced and doesn't happen as regularly as it used to.
When's the next one? Do you know?
I honestly don't know. I couldn't find an account of it happening since the 40s. And interestingly, I found something published in the 40s about how DDT was an effective insecticide against them.
Oh no.
This was published in 1945. And this thing I read about DDT saying that this was an effective pest control method for cockchafer, it said that DDT was the preferred pest control because unlike arsenic-based insecticides, which were the most popular insecticides before DDT, DDT was safe for humans. And that's a quote from that source.
Just to clarify for anyone who's not aware, at the time these were considered perfectly fine insecticides, arsenic and DDT. We have since learned that both are very dangerous for human health.
People would spray their food with arsenic to kill the beetles while also inadvertently hurting themselves too. It made no sense. Was DDT what Silent Spring was written about?
Yeah, DDT was Silent Springs, also Paved Paradise.
Yeah. Since 1945, we found out that DDT can cause birth defects in humans. It devastates bird populations because it affects the formation of their eggs. It was not true that DDT was safe. But, like I said, this published source said it was the preferred pest control because they thought it was safe for people. So it was used very, very widely for a time. And since the use of these industrialized insecticides, numbers of cockchafers have gone down drastically. A couple sources said that their populations have recovered a bit since the 80s when regulation was put into place regulating insecticides and other agricultural treatments. However, I found a study in Hungary that monitored cockchafer populations from 2003 to 2009, and they showed huge declines in cockchafer numbers in just those 6 years. One of their study areas saw a 93% decrease in the population of cockchafers. I didn't specifically look into Hungary's policies on insecticides. It could just be Hungary doesn't regulate them as well as other places or something, but their populations are declining very drastically there. So it's not looking so hot for them.
I think that Pave Paradise is the perfect Cockchafer theme song, by the way, between it telling you not to use DDT and also not to knock down trees and pave places. It's literally what we need to do to help them.
Yeah. Who sang that song?
So the song's title is actually Big Yellow Taxi, but I forget who it was.
Counting Crows. They were singing the cockchafer theme. Leave the soil open for them. Leave the trees up. And don't spray DDT or anything on them because that's not good for anybody. So that's how they're doing today. We really hit them hard and then we kind of backed off a little bit, but things are not looking that great because things get really complicated when you use words like pest to describe a species. Pest, in the minds of the people making the management decisions, pests are things that you want to eradicate entirely. So the devastation of the cockchafer numbers was not seen as a negative to these people who were a couple hundred years before suing them in court. Maybe I would have a different perspective if I was a farmer.
Yeah, I will also say it gets into the fact that we also need to protect our crops and things. So there's a balance that needs to be struck between their populations and our food, because that's important.
Yeah, it's important to feed people, absolutely. But ultimately, this earth is also their home, and we should be working to strike a balance. We should not be working to entirely eradicate things that we see as pests. We should be working toward coexistence.
There's a balance there. You can't just have their populations unchecked either.
Yeah. Exactly. Proper land management, ideally biocontrols, not poisons, and not just total devastation of their populations. I want to see one of these 30 to 40 year mass flights. I think that would be really cool, but that's just me.
I do too. That's kind of why I want to know when the next one is.
Right?
We should also find out if the June bugs do the same thing, because that's a lot closer.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll shuffle our notes, and when we get back, we'll talk about why it's queer. Hi, Sage again. So we want to start taking a pause here in the middle of the episode just to kind of give some updates about the show and where we're all at and plans for the future. Because in the past, we've been a little unreliable and we'd like to work on that. So going forward, we are going to do our best to keep up with monthly episodes posted every last Friday of the month. Next month's episode will be slightly different from our normal format. I will be recording it alone because Ilana, as I said in the intro, is in Alaska, uncontactable. I can't wait to hear about her adventures when she gets back. So we'll have that little solo sesh to look forward to next month. And also, if you're interested in the book that we mentioned in the first half of the episode, Silent Spring, that's by an author named Rachel Carson. She is also a queer scientist. Definitely go check out that book. It's a monumental work in the field of environmental activism. It led to the start of Earth Day. Great novel. Anyway, just wanted to give the full info on that. Enjoy the rest of the episode, and we'll see you on the other side. So on to why it's queer. One of the big questions in the literature that I found, like I said, there are these two species, the forest and the common cockchafer. They co-occur in a lot of places, flying around the same trees. And the females of both species, like I said, produce the whole set of pheromones that attract the males of both species as well. So when they're in these huge calamitous swarms, how do males find females of their species during mating? Because, like I said, they're doing this in the evening, so the light is really low. They're not using visual cues, probably. They're all colored brown, which also indicates to us is probably not visual cues. So how exactly, since the females are producing the same chemicals, do they find others of their same species? And I found a study that intended to investigate exactly that question. Males of the common cockchafer were most often attracted to same species females when those same species females were presented as an option next to females of the other species, the forest cockchafer. So the people doing this study, they went into the forest and they set up these wire cages that were between 0.5 meter and 1 meter apart on a tree branch. And these cages were set up containing 5 unmated bait beetles each. And in the cages were some twigs and some leaves, and the beetles were allowed to eat that foliage. So they were allowed to chew the leaves and release the leaf alcohols that, like we said, would attract the males. So the cages were watched for 30 minutes during dusk, and the researchers found that when offered males and females of the other species, males of the common cockchafer went for the females. Even though they were the other species, they still landed on the cage of the females of the forest cockchafer. And same thing happened with the forest cockchafer. When males and females of the common cockchafer were offered, the forest cockchafer more often landed on the females. However, like I'm saying, more often, they landed on the cages of the males a lot of the time. This was not a perfect thing. So, for example, when the forest cockchafer, the males and the females were offered to the common cockchafer, the males landed on the cages of the females 219 times. However, there were 66 males that landed on the cages of the males. So that's still a pretty big number, you know?
I'd be curious if they tracked, individuals, if it would be the same individuals that keep going to the male versus female.
Right? I know that they didn't. That was a thought that I had. I wish they had done that. But they purposely prevented that by every time that they saw a male land on a cage, they took it off, they sexed it, they figured out what species it was, and then they put it in a cage until the end of the experiment. So they actively prevented the recount of the same beetle multiple times. But like you, I'm very curious whether there was a preference by individual cockchafers, whether there were males landing on the cages of males every time or something. But we don't know that. We just know that they preferred females of the other species when offered both sexes of the other species. Then they did this experiment again where they took common cockchafer males and then they offered them cages of both females this time, though. The females of their own species and females of the other species. And like you'd expect, they more often landed on the cages containing the females of their own species. So this shows that there is some mechanism where they can tell what's their own species and what's not. But either it's not a perfect mechanism or they just don't care as much as we think they should. Because while they landed on the cages with the females of their own species most of the time, they still landed on the cages of the females with the other species a lot of the time. So, for example, for the forest cockchafer, males landed on cages of females with the same species 658 times, but they landed on cages with females of the other species 181 times. So that's like almost a quarter of the sightings were on the other species females. And then in the common cockchafer, it was similar. They landed on cages with females of the same species 111 times, but they landed on the cages with the females of the forest cockchafer 71 times. And compared to 111, like, how much of a preference is that, 71 is not that much lower than 111. So they established that there's a significant preference for what you would expect for the opposite sex and for the same species of the opposite sex. However, it's not perfect, like I said. And an interesting thing to keep in mind is that they did this experiment out in the open, like just on a tree outside. So though when presented with males and females of the other species, males of the common cockchafer landed on the female cage more often, it's interesting that they landed on that cage at all of the females of the other species, considering that they're outside in this mass swarm containing both beetles. So it's not like they didn't have females of the same species readily available to them in the surroundings of the experiment, But still, they, for a certain percentage of the time, landed on cages containing females of the other species, even though there were same species females in the immediate vicinity. So some of the conclusions these authors came to is that this means males, they're trying to find females using odors, the smell of these sex pheromones, in addition to the leaf alcohols. But like I said, the females produce all of the things that both males are attracted to. The authors are thinking that there's probably subtle differences in each species' specific blend of pheromones, like the ratio of how much tuloquinone to benzoquinone there was. But while there's subtle differences, they're very similar because they contain the same key components. So they're thinking that males of the common cockchafer, they're looking for this olfactory profile of the right female, the female of their own species. But they're thinking that their ability to differentiate the specific smell they're looking for, which they smell with their antennae. They use their antennae to sense these pheromones and these chemicals in the air.
They're more than just something that looks fancy.
Yeah, right. So I'm saying smell, but they don't use their nose for it. So they're looking for the specific smell, but they're thinking that they're only looking in a very small area and they can only tell what's right and wrong when there's females of the two species right next to each other so that they can differentiate easier. Like, this is the right one, this is the wrong one. But until they see that contrast, they're just looking for anything that's as close to what they're looking for as possible.
Maybe something's like a certain strength, and so they just go to whatever has the strongest of that whichever chemicals, and they just are like, oh, this one's stronger, so I'm going to go here. But if the other stronger one's not there, they're like, well, this is the source of it, so let's go here.
Right, this is the closest that there is, and it's kind of right, so let's go with it. But while this explains how many times the common cockchafers landed on the cages of the forest cockchafers when there were available females of their species around, while that might explain that, it doesn't explain the whole story here, because nowhere in the discussion of this paper did they address the prevalence of males landing on males or of males landing on the other species females when the same species females were in the cage experiment too. It wasn't even like they had to look at the surroundings of the experiment. When presented this contrasted choice in the same vicinity.
But see, obviously if they're landing on the cages of the males, they're wrong.
Right? So I was like, this is a decent explanation. It kind of gets to part of it, but it's ignoring an entire part of their results, which was that there were males landing on other males and that there were males landing on the other species even when there were the same species females in the experiment. And that is a common theme. This just overlooking the queer part of the results,
Yeah, and sometimes part of this requires more research. Like I had said, it'd be interesting to follow individuals multiple times to see if they had preference for either species or sex.
Right. And this research, this method, kind of uses landings on the cage to infer that the beetle is going in for sex. So they're kind of using the landings as a stand-in for sex acts, you know, because that's what they were getting at. They were getting at mate choice. But to go into more specifically, like, you could be like, oh, well, how do they know that the male-male landings were gay? Like, what if they were just landing to, I don't know, like, get a leaf or something? In 1834, in a German interdisciplinary science journal, a school teacher named August Kelch vividly described his disbelief. He could barely believe his eyes upon discovering in a forest near Ratibor, which is currently called Raciborz in Poland, he observed a male common cockchafer covering a small male forest cockchafer.
Yes.
Kelch initially believed the penetrated male to be a female with male antennae, because the antennae of the males are slightly larger and longer than the females. However, he found that no, it was a male, and the male's genitalia was hidden in his abdomen. And this was not the only report of that. A later report published by the French entomologist Alexandre Laboulbene confirmed Kelch's observations while revealing more technical details about same-sex copulation and cockchafers. So by Laboulbene's observations, he said that from the outside, male-male couplings didn't seem to differ much from male-female couplings. In it, the male dangles backward off of the other male's back, seemingly asleep, with their penis and anal stylet provide the sole point of attachment between the two partners. So you have the receiving partner and then the penetrating partner dangling off the receiving partner's back. And that's the same for heterosexual couplings and male-male couplings. In male-male couplings, the penetrating male's penis is inserted entirely into the external reproductive orifice of the penetrated male. So as a consequence, the penetrated male's genitalia is kind of inverted into their body to create an orifice for the penetrating male to do his thing. So this was observed multiple times in the 1800s by naturalists, and just like the first guy, Kelch, utter disbelief. It couldn't be happening. I found another study with the same setup as the first study with wire mesh cages, and this was just males, and they were offered males and females of the same species. There were 158 landings of males on cages containing females, but there were 34 landings of males on cages containing males. So every single study where this has been looked at, there is a certain percentage of males trying to mate with other males, or with the quote-unquote wrong mate, you know, not the female of the same species. Even the male-male coupling that Kelch observed was the common and the forest cockchafer. It wasn't even two of the common cockchafer. So while most of the time they get it right, like that one study showed a significantly higher percentage of the time they get it right than they don't, there's still a lot of the time that they don't get it right. And a lot of these people observing this in nature, their unanimous opinion at the time was disgust and disbelief. They morally condemned the homosexual copulation they observed in the cockchafers, using words like monstrous, unnatural, and hideous. And their moral disgust informed their interpretation of this behavior. And their interpretation would later, in more recent years to now, be called negative. And some of these negative explanations include August Kelch's, the first to observe this male-male behavior in cockchafers. He said it had to be rape. He said, the larger and the stronger of the two had forced itself on the smaller and weaker one, had exhausted it, and only because of this dominance had conquered it. So, yeah, in his mind, it had to be a show of force. Another explanation later offered was that males copulate with other males only when no females are present, which is called a Hobson's choice, which is when there's supposedly a free choice, like between males and females, but only one option is offered. But like we said, in all of those experiments, there were females surrounding the experiment. There were females sometimes offered in the same experiment, and males still landed on cages with males.
I will say, I said gross before because, like, the descriptions here, this was a time when scientists fully put their own morals and opinions into their papers and onto their subjects. There are multiple possible reasons here. I'm not saying it's not a queer reason. I'm not saying it's not some form of dominance. Different species have different things, but we don't know.
We don't know. So to just assume that it's negative because it's homosexual, it would be one thing to say, oh, this is a show of dominance because this species is very social and it has a social hierarchy and dominance is very important to them. And if there was reason to say these negative interpretations, like, that would be valid, you know? But they came to these conclusions only because they hated what they saw.
Also, some of these negative interpretations are the same for heterosexual couples. The animal kingdom, sex is not always the choice of both partners, as terrible as we may think it is. Sometimes that's exactly how they do it with the female counterpart, too. So is it really that different? I one time watched a male monarch out of nowhere zip in, knock a female off of a flower and onto the ground to mate with it. It was very fast and very wild.
Yeah, and bed bugs, females don't even have genitalia. They don't even have an orifice for the male to penetrate from. So the male literally has to rip a hole into her body to mate with her. So sex is not always like a desirable thing from both partners. It's not always like a positive thing. In a lot of mammals, it forms bonds, is a social thing, but not all animals are social. So in insects, sex is very different. However, to just assume that this specific coupling, like, they didn't say this about a male and a female cockchafer. Like, they didn't say this because of the behavior of the cockchafer or because of its social structure or anything. They only said these things, these reasons that the cockchafers were doing this, having male-male sex, because they hated what they saw. So those were two options. The third interpretation they offered at the time was that males copulate with other males when they mistake a male for a female. The penetrating male is blind with lust and so horny that he just can't control himself and he has to mate with the first thing he finds, and sometimes that's a male. And he can't help that. And so, like, some of these may be true. Maybe the male is just so horny that he just has to have sex with something. You know, maybe that's true. Maybe any of them is true. But we just don't know. We can't assign an intent to their actions. We can just observe what they do and present it as truthfully as possible when communicating about it. And so males often have sex with other males. Males have sex between species, and there's been some rumor of even interspecies heterosexual couplings between the common and the forest cockchafer. So this even gets into what is a species, you know? There's this one definition of a species that says that two species are separate when they don't mate with each other and produce viable offspring. However, there are a lot of things that we think of as species that do produce viable offspring, and this might be one of them. However, the research doesn't show that. The research hasn't really looked into why they do this homosexual behavior, why the males mate with other males. And like Ilana said, like, these naturalists in the 1800s put their direct opinion into their papers, which in some ways is terrible. You know, it's terrible to read these published, official, supposedly objective opinions in these papers that say that these behaviors are disgusting and unnatural and monstrous and hideous and unspeakable. However, at least we actually knew what they thought. And so instead we're left with this body of work that doesn't necessarily say that the authors don't want to think about this or think it's gross or, you know, reprehensible, but they just leave it out. They don't talk about it. They don't investigate it. They don't include it in their discussion of what they've observed. And so therefore we don't really know more than these people knew in the 1800s. We're not going to make assumptions about them. Like I said, maybe it's one of these negative interpretations, but maybe not.
And sometimes it's just the limit of certain studies and certain funding and time. I mean, entomology, if these guys are pest species, there's going to be a lot of research more on how to deter them, how to kill them or prevent them from eating your plants. Not worrying about the male-male coupling or the cross-species coupling. It just depends.
Right.
But hey, any entomologist, there's like 3 different ways you could study these guys from just our ramblings. So go for it.
If you need some master's or PhD projects, feel free to look into these things. Yeah, that's what I have to say. Why can't the cockchafers just be gay? Maybe they are. I'm not saying they are, because like I said, I'm not ascribing an intent to them. But maybe they just don't mind some gay stuff. They've continued to do their thing, even though they've been doing some gay stuff on the side. And some interspecies stuff.
Well, thanks, Sage, for discussing these guys with me. I am now in love with the Doodlebug and the fact that that's one of their alternative names.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you guys for listening. Thanks so much. Happy 10th episode, Sage.
Yes, happy 10th episode.
We'll talk to you guys next time.
Love who you are, be who you will, and remember, queerly, it's natural. Queerly Natural was created by Ilana Zeitzer, Elizabeth Furman, and Hannah Roden, with music by Makefist20. Thank you, Makefist, for putting your music in the Creative Commons. You are very talented. Visual design for the show is done by Ilana Zeitzer. To get updates about the podcast, follow us at Queerly Natural on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We also upload all of our sources and episode transcripts to our website, queerlynatural.com. Above all else, if you liked what you heard today, tell your friends. Thank you so much for listening, and keep an eye out for our next episode coming August 26th. Until next time, stay queer and remember, queerly, it's natural.